What I want to talk about today, well, first of all, good afternoon. What I want to talk about today is really the Black Power movement's relationship to civil rights, but also I'm going to wrap up by trying to discuss the 2008 presidential election within the context of my earlier remarks. I just wrote an essay called From Black Power to Barack Obama for the Brooklyn Rail, and it's Obama's ascent has become sort of a hook for historians and scholars. I can't wait till next year when we see all these books, especially if he wins, right? If he wins, we're in business for the next 4 years, which is always nice to have a topic where people actually listen to the general public. This book that I wrote called Wait Until the Midnight Hour, A Narrative History of Black Power in America, this topic is really personal to me. I was born and raised in New York City. I grew up in the context of the late 70s, 80s, I guess I'm 35 at this point. When I was growing up in the city, there was a lot of racial tension in New York City. I was in high school when a young black man was killed in 1986 in Howard Beach section of New York City. He had been there by mistake, and some people, some white youngsters, gang were chasing him, and basically ran into a highway and was killed by a car. And there was a black woman who was a grandmother, Eleanor Bumpers, who was killed by the NYPD. And this is before Giuliani. This is when Mayor Ed Koch was the mayor of New York. So I grew up in New York City before the Renaissance. People like to say, New York is so nice and clean now. I grew up in a New York City that was extremely racially divided, a lot of racial tension, a lot of crime. Taking the subways was an adventure. Going to school was an adventure. And but my mother was a trade union. She was a hospital worker for $11.99, and my mother was my first history teacher, my first history professor. She would tell me about the 1960s. She would tell me about social upheaval and social protests that occurred there. And that really piqued my interest in the 1960s. I was very interested in Martin Luther King Jr., but I was also very interested in Malcolm X. I was interested in the civil rights demonstrations that came out of the movement in the 1950s and 60s, but I was also interested in the Black Panthers and the social militancy and protests in the 60s and 70s. So that being said, by the time I went to college, I became a major in history and in Africana studies. I was a double major. And after that, I went to graduate school and got a PhD in American history. And it was really in graduate school that I really started to investigate more about the 1960s empirically, going in archives, doing oral interviews, and trying to find out what happened. And so in a way, the publication of my book, Wait Until the Midnight Hour, is really a culmination of that. And what's exciting now is that when we think about civil rights, we usually think about the Black Power movement as the evil twin that wrecked the civil rights movement. And what a new generation of scholars are doing, and they're doing this through really heavy empiricism. By empiricism, I mean they're going to archives, they're getting FBI records, CIA records, State Department records, and traveling overseas. I just came back from a research trip to England to sort of see what Sophie Carmichael did when he was in England for an upcoming book project. They're interviewing people who are still alive. They're looking at presidential records, Lyndon Baines Johnson archives, other archives, to really find out and historically reconstruct what happened. So my comments today are really based on this kind of research, specifically my own, but in a broader context, we're seeing a new subfield of American history develop that's called Black Power Studies. We have civil rights studies, but Black Power Studies. In terms of these terms, civil rights and Black Power, I want to talk about the definitions of these terms. When we think about the civil rights movement in terms of public memory and historically, we usually think of it as just a 10-year period in American history, roughly from May 17, 1954 to August 6, 1965. And that decade encapsulates what I call the heroic period of the civil rights movement. And by the heroic period of the civil rights movement, what I mean is that we have a newsreel-like summary of the events that transpired from May 17th to August 6, 1965. May 17th is the Brown versus Board of Ed Supreme Court desegregation court decision. And we even see the black mother with her small child holding up the newspaper headline that says the Supreme Court is desegregating public schools. In 1955, Emmett Till is assassinated in Money, Mississippi. Emmett Till is a 14-year-old black boy from Chicago. He's spending the summer in Mississippi, and he really has the unfortunate circumstance of saying bye, baby, to the white wife of a shop owner. Till is going to be lynched in the aftermath. His body is going to be placed in the Tallahatchie River. There's going to be a 125-pound cotton gin fan bell tied around his neck. What's important for us about Till is that Mamie Mobley Till, Till's 42-year-old mother, actually allows her son to be viewed and pictured in an open casket. So in 1955, on the cover of Jet magazine, and Jet magazine is still published today by the Johnson Company, and Jet magazine was the African-American working class magazine of the post-war era. By working class, I mean Jet magazine was a small little digest, and the middle class, or the black bourgeoisie, got Ebony. The black workers got Jet. Jet still has the beauty of the week on page 42. Not that I was ever looking at it. When we think about Emmett Till's assassination provides a context for a whole generation of whites and blacks to really see the way in which democracy is not functioning in Southern society. In 1956, a young Martin Luther King Jr. becomes really the spokesperson for the Montgomery bus boycott in Alabama. He's about 26, 27 years old at the time. And I say spokesperson because the grassroots organizers of that bus boycott were people like E.P. Nixon, a former member of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Workers. In 1957, Little Rock Central High School undergoes massive controversy, and President Eisenhower is forced to deploy federal troops to desegregate Little Rock Central High School. We just celebrated the 50th anniversary of that desegregation last year. February 1st, 1960, 4 black students sit in at a lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. And that's going to start the direct action phase of the civil rights movement. 2 months later, there's a new group founded, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. And SNCC is really probably the most important local group of the period because it really is going to attract whites, blacks, and provide a seedbed for feminism, black and white feminism, and really aspects of black power activism as well. 1962, James Meredith becomes the first black student to enroll at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi. Ole Miss is going to explode in 3 days of rage and riot, leaving 1 person dead at the prospect of Meredith enrolling. 1963 is often remembered for the racial clashes in Birmingham, Alabama. In the spring of '63, King, along with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, forms an alliance with an indigenous local group headed by Fred Shuttlesworth in Birmingham, Alabama, to attempt to desegregate public facilities in Birmingham. And when we say desegregate public facilities, in Birmingham, 88% of the black population lived in dilapidated housing, skyrocketing unemployment, police brutality, bread and butter issues, as well as public desegregation. King goes to jail. The last time he's placed in jail in 1963, and he writes his first famous letter from Birmingham jail. What's interesting about that letter is that he was under extraordinary pressure from the clergy and civic leaders in Birmingham to really scale back the movement. And what King argues in the letter from Birmingham jail, it's a letter